I got a question the other day and realized that it's actually a topic that I've never really talked about or discussed before with the program. So I figured I might as well talk about it, and it might improve the way some of you guys make music, because this is really a taste thing. And personally, I don't use this feature at all because it doesn't just fit in with the way that I typically go about working on projects. However, for some people, this is like a quintessential everyday sort of thing. So it's just a matter of personal taste, especially for what's going to work best for you. So here is the question. How in the world do you save the audio tracks for later use once you have stretched and edited them the way you want? Kind of like in Ableton Live, how you can hit the save button and it will go into your user library. I have done searches and nothing really comes up the way I have been searching. So I do apologize if there's already a really good video that details this process. I also don't know if something's out there. It probably is, because this is definitely a great selling point, I think, to this program, especially for people who work a particular way. So let's jump into the program and talk about a few different things. All right, on to the actual question at hand. We have this drum loop in here. Let's just go ahead and turn it down by 6 or so. It's currently in raw mode. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to stretch this out and make sure that I could play it like at 140 BPM. This is a great example where you'd probably want to be able to save that clip and then maybe bring it in later. So you have like your 15 or 20 favorite drum breaks, and you just want to be able to have them all stretched and ready to go if that's the sort of like style and genre of music you make. So I need to do that first. And I know that this is at, I believe, 85 BPM. So let's just go ahead and sync that up first. 85, we'll go in here. We'll stretch this dude out. We'll put the original tempo at 85. All right, let's check it out. Let's make sure everything is working. This one's not giving me any sort of like clicking sound, but I'm still going to put that little fade in because the real sort of transient hit comes a little bit later on, so I don't have to worry about clipping that off. So now I have this, and I could obviously go in here and now change my project to like 140. But let's say that we have another project, and this project is going to be at 100 BPM. How could I just easily transfer these? Well, there's a couple ways I could do it. Again, I could easily just go and I could copy and paste this, but that then requires me to have two projects open, and that's not what I want. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to save this clip. And the way you do it is to actually go into your clips folder section of the browser, which not many people tend to go into. So you can see that it's actually a ways down here. We have our multi-samples, music, samples, presets, devices. I mostly stay in the devices and samples, but we also do have this clips area. And this is similar to like the user library that you see inside of Ableton Live. So all I have to do now is just take this guy, drag it and drop it. And I'm going to call this drum break 1. Stretched. And now here you have the option to files to save within clip, files outside of the project folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that checked. Basically, this just means that you're not going to have problems like searching for the sample later on. And because this sample is coming from an external location, I need to do that, okay? Because otherwise it won't recognize where it's coming from. This is coming from out on my desktop somewhere. So I'll just go ahead, put loop on here as one of my tags. BPM, it's at 140. You'll see that won't matter really, but I'm going to click OK. And now within my library, I have that clip. So now if I had a new project, it's at 100. I open this up. I go into my clips here. I go into my clips, my library. Here it is. I bring it in. Let's take a look at it. It's still stretched here. It kept all of the settings we had before, and now I should be able to play this, and it should be going at 100 instead of 140. And just as a comparison. Right, so there's one example of just the simplicity of saving your clips. And you can take this a lot further, and that's what we're going to do in the next couple of examples. All right, for the next example, we're going to start with just some kind of Bitwig built-in kick drum. All right, so I'm just going to randomly scroll through here, choose one of these. Okay, that's good enough for me, I guess. So I'm going to bring that in here, and we have our clip. So let's take a listen to it. How peaky is this? This is pretty peaky. Probably doesn't need to be that much. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like process this sound a little bit. So nothing major. Obviously, you can take this a lot further if you want. Let's just go and put a couple of things on it for fun. I'm trying to think what's going to be fun in here that we could use. Let's throw on a distortion. Let's throw on some kind of EQ. Then I'm also going to put on the peak limiter here because I don't need it to be as peaky as it actually is. I could drive it in a lot harder. So let's just go and work with these 3 effects. Oh, one other thing I'm going to put on is a reverb just for fun, so I can show you how we can kind of look at this in 2 different ways. Okay, that's the sound we have right now. I should have thought about this, but I probably would also put on some kind of filter here at the start or at the end, but we're just going to leave it as it is. Now we'll drive it into this peak limiter. Actually, it's already going in pretty hard. All right, now we're in business. It's too much. Okay, so I'm happy with that sound. Now, what could we do in this situation if we wanted to save this clip? We have 2 options. The first option would be to actually bounce this out. Now, we have a reverb tail, so we could choose how far we want that reverb tail to go. So I'm just going to say, for this example, I only want it this far. So it's going to play. Actually, you know what? Let's have it just cut off right here. Yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to bounce it. And now we have our bounced version. We can take a listen to that. You can hear how then it cuts off there on the tail. Well, I could go in here and I could then make this even more extreme. So I could like yank it down hard. Or actually go maybe crazy and do the opposite. And here you're hearing a clip on the end, so we'll do something along those lines. We could even go in, mess with the pan, mess with the pitch. Why not? It is stretched, of course. Let's go all the way. So you probably wouldn't do this when you were designing your own kick drum, but if for some reason you were, there you go. So now we have this and we can do what we did before. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to go into my clips location. I'm going to drag it. I'm going to bring it in here. I'm going to call this kick 1. And let's see, 1 shot. That will work for me. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead, just click OK. And now I've saved that in. But there are some things I can't really do. You can see that I have this 1 folder of clips. I can't go in here and add some kind of additional folder, or at least I don't think I can add a folder. But what I could do is add in a collection. Okay, so some people like to make music where they'll make like 10 or 15 kick drums and then they'll do like 10 or 15 bass parts and then they kind of go and just arrange the music later on. I do the exact opposite, so this is why I don't use the clips. But if you're the sort of person who designs a bunch of sounds first and then puts them together later, this is really key. So I can go into my collections here, and right now all I have is a favorites collection. And remember, this is built in within the clips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new collection, and I'm just going to call it kick drums. Okay, so I have this kick drums collection now, and I'm going to take my kick and I'm going to bring it in. Okay, so now I have one of my kick drum samples inside of this kick drums folder. I could add one for snares. I could add one for whatever it is. This is just a way to stay super organized and make it much easier on yourself. So then I could go into my other project that I had here. I could go into my clips. I open up my collections, and when I go to the kick drums, boom, you can see I just have that one option. I can drag, bring it in like so. We can take a listen to it. In this case, I'm going to definitely want this in raw. And because I switched it into raw, we don't have that motion going. But let's go and put it into stretch. And there you can see it saved everything over. But what would happen if I went in here and I decided to save this as a clip? Okay, I have all of this processing on here. Is it going to bring the processing over, or is it just going to save the clip specifically? So let's go back. Let's drag it on in. I'm going to call this kick 1 with processing. Again, it's a one shot, and I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And now if I go into my other project here, I turn that on. Remember, we didn't drag this up yet, but I could do that very shortly. Just have to delete these little tags that are going on. Go back into the location, into my clips. Okay, here it is, kick 1 with processing. Let's drag it in. Did it bring over all of the effects? It did bring over all of the effects. So this is very powerful. Personally, I probably would always bounce it for a couple of reasons. One is if you've spent a lot of time making a kick drum, do you really want to go back in there and then like re-massage everything? You could just as easily bring in new effects to do that if you need to. This is going to help you avoid the temptation of going in and messing around. But just as an FYI, it's totally possible to save clips with everything going on. So this is beyond clips, obviously. This is like basically saving audio tracks. That's what we've done here. We have all of our settings saved. We didn't even have to put this into a chain. It's just there for us, ready to go. All right, so this also works with instruments. So it doesn't just have to be with samples. We could create an instrument track here. Again, we'll bring in, say, like the polysynth. If I know how to spell, that would be helpful. And we have, our great little part going on here. And let's just put it into loop. All right, so we have that great part, but we could also then add effects processing, and it doesn't even have to be built into the polysynth. Remember, you could always go in here to the polysynth and you could save your presets if you want to do that. You just have to click the folder icon. You can save that preset. But you could also go with the clips approach, where it's the equivalent of kind of saving your preset, only you can now drag all of your effects here. So we could go crazy with this, and we could put on some kind of like effects layer, I think is what they call it. We could add the effects layer and then bring in like a dry version and then bring in a wet version. And then the wet version, we could put on some kind of a delay. And we'll also put a reverb on that too. All right, so we've got that part going in like so, and now we can just go and add this back to our clips. I've already done it, but this time I've added a new note in, so we'll see the difference. I'll bring this in, polysynth hashtag, let's call this hashtag 1. I'll go ahead and click OK. So now we have our polysynth parts here. I can go back to my other project, and we already know how this is going to work. It's going to bring in not only just the polysynth, but it's also going to bring in all of the processing that we've done right along with it. And again, we could go in here to our collections now. Okay, we have this kick with processing. Let's put that in there. Let's create a new collection, call it synths. And I'm going to take my polysynth parts and I'm going to put it in there. And now when you were working on whatever, say a new track, and you've had and saved a bunch of clips, you could then just go in here to your collections or specifically within the location of your clips and pick things out and play with them and see what you want to use. All right, so that is the basics of saving clips. I took this a little bit further than I really expected to, and hopefully maybe you learned something new. And if you haven't already worked this into how you make your music, maybe this will help quite a bit. So take care. So the first thing I want to talk about just quickly is the way that I have kind of gone about working with the program when it comes to like saving clips to reuse them in an additional project or really technically in the same project. So I don't think I've ever showed you guys this before, especially when grouping wasn't available. I would do this all the time because just like being a little OCD, I didn't like having to scroll down between like 30 to 40 tracks to kind of find what I was working on. So what I always do, and I still do this now, is when I'm working on a project of any kind, I always have two projects open. So I make the project, I then do a save as, and I create another one in the same folder. So you can see here I have saving clips, and then I have saving clips sketchboard. And what I use the sketchboard for is really like what I would call focused part creation. So imagine here that we had 10 or 15 different tracks. We had an arrangement. Our CPU is kind of starting to spike, but I need to add in some kind of software synthesizer and something that I know is going to push the CPU even harder. Now, I could always go into preferences, increase the buffer size, things of that nature. But really, more than anything else, I just get annoyed sometimes with my computer fan coming on, and it will come on even if I'm just kind of moderately pushing the DSP. So what I'll do is I'll go into the master, for example, and I'll just take that relative balance and highlight whatever the region is where I'm going to work on the new part. So let's say here it's going to be supposedly going to fit within this 4-bar range. Now, what I would do is I would go and I would actually stretch this out a little bit further just so I could have some context if I was going to do something like have a reverb or a delay tail. And once that's done from the master, you can actually right click here and choose bounce. And then when you bounce it, you're getting everything. So whatever the master track is feeding, so as long as nothing is muted, you're going to get that mix that you've been working on so far. You click OK. Here it is, you get that new track. So in this situation, we just have the one. But now what I would do is I would go in, it would be my master. I would take this audio track, I would go ahead and copy the audio track, go into my new project, and I would just paste it on in here. So this is it. I would call it like, reference, whatever the case may be. And now when I turn on this project, I'm basically shutting everything off here. So this is even better than going in and, like deactivating the tracks, because when you deactivate the tracks, it still takes up a lot of space and it can still cause like some minor crashes. So this would work even before you had the option of deactivating tracks. So now what I would do is I would go into this project here. I would add the instrument track. I'd go in here, I'd put on the polysynth isn't a good example because it doesn't really take up a lot of CPU, but I'd bring the polysynth in. I'd add a part. Okay, I'll put my part in here. There's my part. Hooray. Congratulations. Let's just stretch it out. I would bring my part in here, and then I would do any kind of additional processing that I wanted to do with it. And now I have two options. One option is to actually take the polysynth part, copy it, bring it back into the original, but that's only going to add more pressure on my CPU. So what do I do from this page here? What I do is I take this and I go and I specifically bounce this out. So what I can do is I can consolidate this clip, get rid of those loop markers. Again, let's imagine that there's some kind of tail on the end of this. I could go in, I could bounce this. I have it, and now what I would do is I would copy this guy back in. This is my synth part, so let's at least call it synth part for organization, since this is what this video is all about. I'd go in here, I would copy this track, and then I would bring it back in. All right, so now I have that synth part. I don't really need this master anymore for reference, and there you go. And now with this, I can go in, I can save this project, and I can keep that polysynth part. So I'm not worried about like doubling up on CPU. So if I need to come back and make changes, I can always come back to the sketchboard, make changes, and rebounce. Nowadays, when you're working inside the computer, hard drive space is not the issue. So it's fine to have like as many samples and as many bounces as you need. The bigger thing working against you is normally CPU consumption. So this is a great way to distribute it up, but to continue to save those parts. And so if I had like a bunch more parts here that I was doing this for, I would just go in and I would like group these all together. Okay. And then again, I have just a really nice clean palette to work on, so I don't get distracted by everything else that's going on. At least that's the way that I kind of go about doing it. So what I want to get across here, though, is that this isn't like something that you suddenly need to start doing tomorrow, because this is just a personal taste thing, and that's just the way I do it. The way I do it is not the best way. Trust me, I know that. I know everyone's going to get on me for this. I still do not use this browser thing at all. The only time I use it is when I'm looking for the piano, and I go into the presets, and then I get the piano. But that is like the only usage where I use that thing, even though I know that